Welcome to Creative Tian channel. In this video, I'm going to make a neck warmer again. This is a large cable knitted sideways with a reversed stockinette stitch background. And I'm going to use an LK150 knitting machine for this project. There are many ways to knit this neck warmer. I'm going to knit all the pieces separately and then sew them together. This way you have more control of the size of the cable and you can adjust it easily. Another way is to knit it directly on the machine, but because this is an oversized cable, I have 10 stitches over 10 stitches. So the traditional way to knit the cable crossing will be a little bit difficult. You can also knit 2 panels of the 10 stitches first using sew-as-you-go method. When you are knitting your main panel, you attach the cable stitch row by row. The yarn I'm using is Ella Ray Lace Merino worsted. This is a very light worsted weight yarn, so I think you can substitute with any DK weight yarn or light worsted weight yarn. So there are 3 pieces, the main panel and the 2 long pieces, that's the cable. We will fold the main pieces and sew the cable to complete the loop. And then we'll do some Kitchener stitch to connect the other ends. And this will be 2 layers, so you'll be very warm. I start knitting with waste yarn. I have about 75 stitches. The stitch number is the height of your neck warmer, and the row number will be the width. So I start with waste yarn and cast on 75 stitches. You can use any type of cast on, and I'm just starting every other needle and then change to every needle. After several rows of waste yarn, change to the main color yarn. And I'm going to use tension 6, and the upper tension is number 5. Now make sure the counter is back to 0, 0, 0, and we can start to knit plain stockinette stitches. I knit total of 120 rows. After sewing up the cable, it is a little bit snug. If you want it wider, you can add more rows, maybe 140 or 150 rows. It also depends on your spacing of the cable. When you have more crossings, the fabric will be tighter. After 120 rows, I knit a few rows of waste yarn and take it off the machine. Next is the cable. Each side of cable is 10 rows, so I cast on 10 rows and start knitting plain stitches. Because the cable has curves, so I will need more stitches than the plain stockinette stitch. So I knit about 150 rows, and then knit a few rows of waste yarn and take it off the machine. If you are not sure, you can knit extra rows, because later you can always undo the extra rows. But if it's too short, it's harder to fix. So we knit 2 long cable panels the same way. Now we have all the pieces ready. The knitting part is pretty easy. The next part is the sewing. I want the cable to stand out more, so I'm going to use the back side of the stockinette stitch to become the outer side. So it's a reverse stockinette stitch as the background for the cable. So we just fold in the main piece and leave some space for cables. And starting from one side, we will just twist the cable the way you like it. You can decide the spacing and how many cable crossing you like for this neck warmer. You can also calculate all the stitch numbers and divide it by the cable crossing numbers. And just make sure the beginning and end will have to match because we want a continuous pattern. You can sew the seams any way you like. I'm using a whip stitch. It's very simple, just go through 2 loops, one from each side. And I'm going to use every other rows. Or if you look closely at the edge, if you uncurl it to find the outermost edge, you can see a loop and then a knot and then a loop. And I'm going to pick up the longer loop and skip the knot. If you don't see the loop and knot, you can just do it every second stitch. It's the same. Sometimes it's not easy to see the loops and knots. So I sew up the cables based on my chart. I start from left side of my chart. I have 3 loops. That's actually 6 stitches. And then I have alternating either 7 loops or 8 loops. And you can decide how many stitches you want. If it's not even, you can add 1 stitch or take out 1 stitch. So I start with 3 loops and change to the other side of the cable, knit 8 loops, and then switch back to the first panel and knit 7 loops. And I keep switching that so it creates the cable pattern. And this is after sewing up the cable. I have extra length. I'm going to unravel it. I put the stitches on some cable needles. And next we are going to do the Kitchener stitch. As you can see, the only area that's the stockinette stitch is the cable. So we are going to do the regular Kitchener stitch for the cable area. And first we just have to pick up all the stitch, make sure the stitch number matches on both sides. And we will do the setup row, starting with the purl. Thread the yarn purlwise through the front needle, and then thread the yarn knitwise in the back needle. And then we will start our repeats. That's the knit the first stitch in the front needle, take it off the needle, and then purl the second stitch. For the back needle, we purl the first stitch, take it off the needle, and then knit the second stitch. And we just keep repeating that until all the cable is done. Next, we have to prepare the Kitchener stitch for the purl side of the stockinette stitch. I just pick up all the stitches on my knitting needle and then take off the waste yarn so it's clean and easier to see. The Kitchener stitch for the reverse stockinette stitch is actually the opposite of the regular Kitchener stitch. For the setup stitch, we start with going through the first stitch of the front needle knitwise, and then going through the first stitch of the back needle purlwise. So it's the opposite from the regular Kitchener. And the repeat is also opposite. Now we go back to the first stitch of the front needle. Instead of doing the knit, we are going to do the purl and then take it off the needle. And for the second stitch, we will do the knit. And then for the back needle, we start with knit and then take it off the needle. And then second stitch, we'll do purl. So we will keep repeating that, and then we are done. We just need to steam block it to make the stitch more even. And then you have a very warm neck warmer. Since we are sewing the cable separately, we can have fun with the cable part. You can have different colors or different texture. Maybe one side of the cable you can have a different stitch to create an interesting texture. Or you can have one side of cable wider so it's not symmetrical. So that's the simple and practical project. I hope you like it. Thank you for watching and talk to you next week.